Hello there, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our webinar, Get Your Payroll Done for Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and we are joined today by my colleagues Sophie and Laura, who are both standing by in the background, ready to answer your questions. Let's now take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar. So we're going to start with some steps to prepare to process your payroll. So I'm going to run through 4 tasks to complete before you process the current payment run. We're then going to move on to get the payroll done, where we're going to take you through a typical pay run, start to finish, including the submission to HMRC, which is known as a full payment submission. We're going to finish the demo with some month-end tasks, including the P32 report that you can use to work out the payment due to HMRC, and submitting the EPS if required to submit any adjustments to your liability. And we will finish with a quick run through of the further support available, including upcoming webinars, Help Centre and Sage University. So we've got plenty to pack into the session today, and we'll get started with preparing to process your payroll. So for this part of the webinar, I'm going to take you through a 4-step checklist. Those 4 steps are: number 1, to add any new starters that joined you since the last payroll that you ran. Step 2 is to enter absences that qualify for a statutory payment, such as sickness or maternity leave. Step 3 is to put employees who are not being paid on hold to exclude them from the pay run. And step 4, if you receive your notifications online, is to check your IR Secure mailbox for any new tax code or student loan notices. So we're going to run through some of those steps in a demo. So I'm just going to bring the slides down, and we'll just go full screen. And we'll start with adding new starters. So first thing I'll mention is that whenever you take on a new starter, they should have with them either a P45 from their previous employer or a starter checklist, which was previously known as a P46. So the starter checklist contains all the information you would need to assign the correct tax code for a new starter that doesn't have a P45. But it's also a really useful form for employees that do have a P45, because it will provide information that you wouldn't find on a P45, such as a student loan type for employees that are repaying a student loan and the starter declaration. Now, I've put a link to this webpage on the handout, but you can view the starter checklist on the gov.uk website. An employee could fill it in online and print it out, or there's a convenient PDF that you could download and get them to fill in by hand. And basically, you're capturing here the employee's personal details, so the full name, gender, address, national insurance number, etc. And you'll be asking them to select the relevant employee statement, either A, B, or C, which would determine the tax code that they go onto. So they can read the information and choose that starter statement. And if they are repaying a student or postgraduate loan, they'll also get information on this form about the different plan types, so that you can deduct the correct plan type where required. So it is a really useful form for any new starter, even those with a P45. Now, when it comes to setting them up in your payroll, you'll need to create an employee record for them. And I'm just going to share a tip with you. If you have an existing employee that you'd like to use as a template for the new employee, if you select them before you create the new employee record, you'll be able to copy over some of the settings. So in my example, I have an employee who is leaving this period, and I've hired a direct replacement for them. So they'll be doing the same job, I want them to have the same settings. So I've selected the existing employee in the list, and then to create the new record, I can go to my employee tasks. I can either use the employee wizard and enter the information step by step. So when I click on employee wizard, you'll see there is an option to create the new employee record based on an existing employee. Or the other way to create a record is the quick employee screen. It's my personal preference. If I click onto quick employee, because I've selected an existing one, it's going to ask me if I want to copy over information. So by clicking yes, it means that you're using consistent settings across different employees. Now, I'm then going to fill in the employee details. So anything with a star next to it is mandatory, and you should be providing at least 2 address lines and a postcode, which I will do now. If you're going to be using online services, which I'll touch upon later on, for your payslips and P60s, you can enter an email address that will be used as the logon for the employee to view their online payslips and P60s. And I'm just going to run through and enter the rest of the mandatory information. I'm going to say I've conducted my right to work checks, and I'm going to enter a start date for this employee. So starting on the 13th of May, and it's copied across the payment method and pay frequency from the existing record. Now, this section is where you would enter the starter form details. So if you do have a P45, you can enter the P45 details, such as the leaving date, the total pay and the total tax, but you will still need to choose a starting declaration, which is where the starter checklist can come in quite useful. Now, in my case, I don't have a P45, so I'm going to choose the P46 option, which is the old name for the starter checklist. And then all I need to do is to select the starting declaration that the employee chose, which in this case was statement B, and it's put them on the emergency tax code in relation to that statement. I can then complete the remaining details. So I'm going to pop a national insurance number in and choose the standard rate NI category for this employee. They are not paying back a student or postgraduate loan, so I'm going to set those to no, and you can see it's copied across things like the department and some of the pay elements for this particular employee. Now, when it comes to pensions, if you use our pensions module, any pension that needs to be assigned will be done at the point you run a pension assessment. So pensions module users, you should not assign a pension when you set up the employee record. If you don't use our pensions module, you should do a manual assessment to see whether the employee needs to be auto-enrolled, and then you can assign the pension manually from within their employee record. So I've left this at no pension scheme at this stage. Now, this employee is going to get a fixed salary, so I'm actually going to enter their annual salary in the gross salary section, which is this amount just here, and that is paid per year. And then we've got an overtime payment that's going to automatically work out the hourly rate based on the gross salary and the contracted hours. So I'll show you how that works in just a moment. Now, I now have enough information to save the new employee record. And if I'm entering another employee doing a similar role, I can retain some of the details by clicking Save and Retain. I'm just going to go ahead and click Save and Clear. We get a few reminder messages that we should enter bank details and contracted hours in the employee record. And if I close out of this screen, you can see that the new record has been added to the end of the list. So then you would just go in and you would add any missing information. So for example, if I go onto the salary information, I can add the contracted hours. So that's going to be 35 per week in this example. And by doing that, if I look at my pay elements, the overtime payment, being a factored payment, has calculated the hourly rate based on the salary and the contracted hours. So that was step one, adding a new starter. The second step is to enter any absence information for employees on sickness, maternity, paternity, or adoption leave. And this will then enable the system to calculate the statutory payment. Now, I've already set one up for one of my employees, but I want to show you how I did that. So employee 4 is starting some maternity leave this month. So if you select an employee that you need to record absence for and go to the employee tasks, you'll see you've got options to record sickness, adoption, maternity, and paternity. So earlier I went into recording maternity and I entered the due date for the baby, the employee's last day of work before they start their maternity leave, and I checked the entitlement, and you can see the system has checked all the qualifying conditions. It's worked out all of the key dates, and it's displaying the statutory entitlement to their maternity pay here in the bottom right-hand corner. So we do run other webinars on statutory payments, where we go into more detail on how to set this up, but this is one of your preparation tasks before running a payroll. So I'm just going to save the details and close out of this screen. and then move on to my next step in the preparation checklist, which will be to put any employees not being paid on hold. So you might need to do this if you have employees who don't work all of the time. Maybe they're seasonal workers, or they're on some kind of unpaid leave at the moment, maybe unpaid maternity leave. And by placing them on hold, it will exclude them from the pay run, and it will also enable you to inform HMRC in your next FPS that at the moment they are being irregularly paid. So if you need to put someone on hold, you just go into their employee record, you'd click onto the employment tab, and you can set the status, switching it from OK to on hold. And you would keep them on hold until the next time they need to be paid, in which case you would change their status back to OK. Now, actually, I'm not going to do that for this employee. They are currently working, but I did want to show you where you can set the status in the employee record. So on to my final step in prepare to process, which is to check for any tax code or student loan notices. Now, if you get them in the post, you'll need to action these by making the relevant change in the employee record. But if you get them online, you'll be able to check for any new notices and apply them directly to the relevant employees, all straight within Sage 50 Payroll. So I'll show you where you can do this. If you go to e-submissions, you'll see there's an option to open the IR secure mailbox. So this will then connect to your HMRC mailbox, linked to your PAYE online account, and you'll be able to click New Mail here at the top in order to check for any new notices. It's a good habit to get into at the start of a pay run. So if there are any changes that need to be made, you'll see notices arranged into folders under HMRC mailbox, and you'll then be able to select and open the notice, and you'll be able to apply any of those changes. But good news for me is I don't have any new notices, so I can close out of the secure mailbox. I'm then going to return back to my payroll tasks in preparation for actually processing my payroll. So those are the preparation steps. Just as a quick recap, we started by adding a new starter. And if you select an existing employee, you can copy over certain information from that record. We then entered any statutory absences. And remember, you've got those recording links, which is a really convenient way of setting up the absence. If you've got employees not being paid, put them on hold. And then finally, if you get them online, check your secure mailbox for any new tax code or student loan notices. And that starter checklist, if you wanted to download that, there's a link to that on the slide. So moving on now to processing your payroll. I am going to take you through a full pay run, start to finish, but I will focus on 5 key tasks, and I'll try and explain where other tasks do fit in and around this process. So the 5 steps we're going to run through is setting our process date, which will be the date the employees receive their pay. We're then going to enter the employees' payments for the current period. We'll produce pay slips and other reports, such as payment summaries. We'd update the records, which will save the values to the employee's history. And then we will submit our payroll information to HMRC as part of a full payment submission that needs to be sent on or before the employee's pay date. So first step is setting the process date. It is important that you enter the date the employees receive their pay rather than the date they worked up to. The only exception to that rule is where the regular pay date falls on a non-banking day, in which case you would record the regular pay date as your process date, but you'd actually make the payment to your employee on the nearest banking day. So let's complete this first step in the demo. If I just bring the slides down. So I'm going to be working through the payroll tasks for this part of the webinar, which you can either run from top to bottom in the tasks pane here on the left-hand side of the screen, or if you're a new user, you might find our process maps are quite useful for running your pay run. It helps you get everything in the right order, and you can switch those on by going to the View menu at the top. You'd come down to Change View, and then you would click onto Process Map. So that option has moved since previous versions. It's now in the View menu, Change View and Process Map, and it can be resized like so, just to suit your personal preference. So following the tasks here on the left-hand side or running left to right in the process map, you can see that the first task is to change the process date. So if I click on that now, you can see it is set to the current pay date because I didn't change it when I logged in, or the current date, I should say. So my employees actually receive their pay on the last day of each calendar month. So I'm going to set my process date to the 31st of May. And you can see just underneath, it confirms the tax period that pay date falls into. So once your process date has been set, your next step will be to select the employees that you need to pay. Now in this demo, I'm running a very simple payroll where all employees are paid monthly on the same pay date. But if you do have different payrolls, maybe weekly and monthly, what you can do is you can organize your employee list by using the outline option here at the top. So if I click onto outline, you'll see that at the top of the tree, I've got all employees, but I can then filter my list and select only those paid monthly. And if I had any weekly paid employees, I've got a quick way of selecting the weeklies. So a bit of a tip, if you do run multiple pay frequencies, I'm just going to stick with all employees because all of mine are paid monthly, and I'll just click outline again to hide the outline tree. Now to select the employees, a quick way of selecting them all is to click clear and then swap, or you can click on them individually in the list. So I've now got everyone selected who I want to pay, and our next step will be to go ahead and enter their payments. So you can do this either from the Enter Payments link in the payroll tasks, or if you're following the process maps, you'll find Enter Payments from here. Now, something just to mention is that it is possible to reset payments before you enter the payments for the current period, which you might find useful if you run more of a variable payroll, where the number of hours worked seems to change all the time, or the payment rates change. But if you don't run reset payments, by default, it will show you the previous period's values in the Enter Payments screen. So Reset Payments wizard, just before Enter Payments in the process map, and also in the tasks. And this allows you to go through selecting which payments you want to reset, and whether you want to reset hours, multipliers, and rates. But like I say, I run more of a static payroll, so I'm going to go straight into the Enter Payment screen. You will be asked if you want to check for updates to current legislation, if you've got this set and enabled. So I'm just going to click yes. And because I've installed the latest update to Sage 50 Payroll, it's telling me that there are no legislation updates found. So I can go ahead and click OK. And then it'll show me the current payments for the first employee in our list. You can see the employee details displayed at the top. Now the payment and deductions are organized into different tabs within the Enter Payment screen, as you can see running across the top of the screen. And we always see a gross to net summary at the bottom, showing the gross pay values, PAYE and national insurance, and the employee's net pay. The idea is you would enter the values for the current period. So I've already got a fixed salary entered. Maybe we've got some hours of overtime. We might even have a bonus payment this month. And then you can click on any of the other tabs if you need to enter deduction information, attachment of earnings, company loan repayments, sickness or parental absence. And then there's a summary of current payments and deductions. It's a good place to check things like pension contributions. There's information about how the calculations have been done, and there's a section for you to record your notes. So main tabs really are the payments tab and the summary tab. And once you're happy with the payments entered, if you click Save/Next at the bottom, that then takes you onto the next employee in the list. And it's just then a case of repeating the same steps. So I'm going to enter a bonus payment for this employee, have a quick check of the summary, Save and Next to move us on to employee 3. Now, something I mentioned earlier is that employee 3 in my demo is going to be leaving this month. So when it comes to leavers, you do need to remember to pay them everything they're owed when it comes to processing their final pay run. Now, sometimes you will need to make adjustments to things like salary if they haven't worked for the full period. And in this particular example, my leaver is leaving on the 23rd of May. So they're not working for the full month, and therefore I don't want to pay them a full month's salary, and I'm going to manually adjust the salary amount. Now, there's a few different ways you could do this, and you'll have your own company policy on how to make adjustments for part periods. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to adjust the hours or number value, and I've checked the number of working days in May. So there are 23 working days if you work Monday to Friday in the month of May. And I want to pay this employee for 18 of those 23 days. So if I click into the hours or number, you'll see there's a little calculator icon on the right. So this is quite handy because I can do a calculation, 18 divided by 23, which will reduce the hours or number. And if I tab into the rate, you can see the amount has reduced accordingly. So always consider any other final payments you may need to make. So there might be holiday pay if the employee hasn't taken all of the holiday that they'd accrued. Could be things like overtime that they're owed. And there is a checkbox at the bottom that you should tick for any final payments, and that will enable payroll to do some checks in the background and inform you about any potential outstanding items. So I'm going to tick it for this employee. And you can see that it tells me that there's an outstanding attachment order. So I will need to notify the court or creditor that the employee is moving on. It also advises the next steps for a leaver. So it's important you update their records to ensure tax and NI details are correct, and then run the leaver wizard before making your full payment submission. And I'll show you that a little bit later on in the demo. So just moving on to the next employee. This was the employee starting her maternity leave this month. And because I'd entered the maternity details, if I click the summary tab, this is where you'll find any statutory payments that have been calculated. I can see we have statutory maternity pay. And if I want to see a breakdown of that amount, I can select it and click the drop down arrow. I can see the maternity details, and on the entitlement tab, I can actually see the number of weeks that equates to. So again, the first 2 weeks of SMP, and it's being paid at the higher rate. So if you're happy with the statutory pay amount, you then need to consider any adjustments you need to make to the basic pay, as currently they're getting a full month's basic plus their SMP. And in this example, we want to pay the employee their usual basic, but made up of statutory pay and company pay. So there is a make-up basic option that you can use to do an automatic adjustment. And the way it works is you put in the full salary that you want the employee to receive. And then on the summary tab, you'd click Make Up Basic. You check that the payment you want to adjust is displayed here, and you would click Yes. And you can see it's reduced the basic to the usual basic pay, but it's being made up of statutory pay and company pay. So what I'm going to do is just save the standard payments for the rest of my employees. Most of them are getting fixed salaries, but I do have a few paid hourly. So this is where you would enter the number of hours worked, and it will multiply by the hourly rate. And when it comes to this last employee, they were a new starter and they haven't worked a full month. So I'm going to do a similar adjustment to what I did with my leaver. And for this employee, I want to pay them for 15 working days out of a possible 23 this month. So I have slightly reduced their salary this month, and I can put it back up to a full salary when they are paid next month. Now, if you use the pensions module, one of your next steps would be to do a pension assessment, which would then assign a pension scheme if the employee needs to be automatically enrolled. But if you don't use the pensions module, you would need to make sure that you've done a manual assessment, and if required, you've added the pension scheme within the employee record. Now, because I don't use the pensions module in this demo, I'm I'm just going to show you a bit of a tip. If you need to make any changes to the employee record when you're in the middle of enter payments, you don't have to close out and then select the employee. What you can do is you can click this employee button, which will take you into the employee record. And in my case, I'm going to click on the pensions tab. I'm going to click manage schemes, and I'm going to add them manually onto my pension scheme. So we'd enter the join scheme date, it's probably the start date, and active membership will be the date I send the information to the pension provider, which I'm going to do around pay date. And then we've got the contribution details that have pulled through from the pension scheme. So I've got that pension assigned now, and on the summary tab, we can see the pension contribution has been deducted. So that's it for entering the payments. Just to let you know, there is a different way that you could enter hours worked for hourly paid employees, maybe a slightly quicker way, using the timesheet entry option. So it is shown here in the process map and also in the payroll tasks. And if you go into timesheet entry, you get a grid view of the payments that you've included in the timesheet entry option. And in this example, it might be quite a handy way of entering overtime hours. If I'm just given a list of overtime worked, and I could just quickly type the number of hours in for each of these employees, and I could save the timesheets like so. So just an alternative to entering the payments in the Enter Payments screen. So we'll just do a quick recap of where we're up to in the pay run at that point. So we started by setting the process date, being the date that the employees will receive their pay. And then the next step was to enter the payments. So before doing this, you could run reset payments to clear previous values. The timesheet entry is an alternative way of entering hours worked. There's also a data import option. It's possible to import either timesheet information or payment information. And then once you've saved all of the payments, if you have our pensions module, that is the point at which you would run the pension assessment. And in the handout, you can click on any of these links to read more about the highlighted options. A reminder of the Enter Payment screen then. It's organised into tabs for the various payments and deductions. So you would enter the required hours and rates. By default, it will show you the previous period's values. And then at the bottom of the screen, you've got that breakdown gross to net. And once you're happy with the values, you click on Save/Next to move on to the next employee. And the top tip, if you need to get into an employee record in the middle of Enter Payments, you can do so by clicking that employee icon in the top left corner. So next step is to produce your pay slips and reports. And there are 3 different pay slip formats that can be used in Sage 50 Payroll. I'm going to show you a couple of them in the demo. So we will have a look at online pay slips, where pay slips are uploaded to the HR online portal, and your employees can view them either in a web browser or via the mobile app. There is an option to email pay slips as a secure attachment, either from Outlook or from webmail, or you can go old school and you can print your pay slips either on a plain paper or pay slip stationery. But Sage no longer produce stationery. You can still get them from third-party sellers. So we'll take a look at the pay slips in the demo. We also have a couple of recommended reports. So payment summary reports give a breakdown of each employee's pay and deductions. And they're really useful for kind of reconciling values once you've completed a pay run. So we have a part 1 and a part 2 that we would recommend. And it's even possible to bundle them together as a report selection and run a selection of reports at the same time to produce a single reports pack. So I'll try and show you some of that in the next part of the demo. So bringing them slides down, I've been through and I've entered the employees' payments. Next step is to run the pre-update reports. So from the payroll tasks, it's just after the pension assessment. Same location in the process map as well. First thing you will see are any reports that you've added to your favorites. So I've added a payslip layout and the payment summary, part 1 and 2. You can find the payslips under the payslips folder. So mine is a laser payslip because I print onto A4, and I've just selected the standard laser payslip and I've clicked the star to add it to my favorites. And then the summary reports, if you click summary here on the left, you've got payment summary part 1 and 2, and you've got both landscape and portrait versions. Now to preview a report, you can select it and click preview, or you can double click the report and that'll bring the preview up on screen. So first thing I want to show you is one of the standard payslip layouts. So I'm going to run it from my favorites, and I've actually set up some of my employees to receive online documents. So it is asking, do I want to include those employees in the printed version? I'm just going to click yes to that message. And then the report preview appears on screen. So this one has 2 payslips per page. You can see payment information, deductions, year-to-date values, and employees' net pay. So I've got 6 pages in total. I can scan through and I can look at each employee's payslip. Now, if you plan to print them out, please be aware that when you print them, the only things that print out are the text and the numbers. So letters and numbers print out, but this green background is just a template designed to kind of represent the stationery that you might be printing onto. So if you're printing on a stationery, that's fine. If you're not, you can either just print them as they are, so it just prints out the text, or you have the option of exporting the report and saving it as a PDF. So I'm just going to drop this on my desktop, and I'll just call it May Payslips. And when it exports, it includes the background. So if you wanted to print the background, you could open up the PDF that you exported and you could print it from there. If not, you can just print directly all of the text onto stationery or onto plain paper. So that's a payslip. Quick look at the payment summaries. So part 1 focuses on the gross to net for each employee. So it starts with the total gross pay, got deductions for tax and national insurance and pension. It'll show any statutory payment values, post-tax payments and deductions down to the net pay. So this total here on the right-hand side is how much net pay I'll be paying out to my employees. And again, you can print or export these reports. And then part 2 just kind of supplements part 1. It's got more focus on employer contributions. So you've got the employer NI on this one, got the employer pension, and a record of tax codes and NI categories as well. So really useful reports. Would recommend at a minimum, you do your payment summaries and your pay slips if you're choosing to print them. Now, I did mention report selections, and we do a separate webinar on this. But what a report selection does is it allows you to choose a number of reports to run at the same time. So here's one I prepared earlier. And if I just preview my report selection, you'll see that it's ran each of the reports and organized them into tabs in the preview. I've got 4 different reports, including the pay slips. And what I could do at this point is I can click on the little drop-down arrow next to export, and I could export all of these reports as a single document. I'm going to call it May Payroll Reports Pack. And that's quite a handy way of keeping reports for your own records. So that includes the copies of the pay slips and the payment summary reports. And if I have a look on my desktop now, you can see I've got that reports pack. Got 9 pages in total, including the payment summaries and pay slips. So a bit of a top tip there to streamline your reporting. Other thing I want to show you is online pay slips. So this is really our recommended method for pay slips these days. It's secure, only takes a few clicks. It gives your employees self-service to their pay slips so they can view historical pay slips as well. And when it comes to uploading them, it is really simple. It is just a few clicks. So I've got some of my employees set up for this. And if I click Upload Online Payslips, you'll see the 5 employees that are set up. It shows me their gross and net pay values. And then we can either publish them immediately, so the employee can view them straight away, or we can publish on a date in the future. So I'm going to publish them a couple of days before pay date. And I just click the Publish Payslips option. So simple as that. Once it's set up, they're now set to publish on the date specified. There is a link to log into your portal, and you would have admin access if you're the one that set this up. This is what the admin portal looks like. So you can view all the individual employee records in Sage HR, or you can get an overall view of payslips by clicking the payslips option on the left. What I can see here is I've got 5 pending payslips for May. I can view the details by clicking on them, view them like so, and even download the PDFs. And on this publish date, those payslips will be available to the employee. And what the employee would see, if I just jump into one of the profiles, is they would see their own information. So they can view their employee and personal information, which actually syncs up with your payroll records. But then for payslips and P60s, they can see any published documents. They can view them on screen, can view them in the mobile app, Sage HR app, also view their P60s if you've uploaded any of them. So just a flavour of online payslips and P60s, really great feature included with our payroll subscriptions. So that is our payslips and reports done. Let's now quickly look at the next steps. So just jumping back to the slides. There are other recommended reports, by the way, if you follow the link on the handout. So plenty of reports to look through, choose the ones that would suit your needs. And once you're happy with all the information on your payslips and reports, your next step will be to update the records. So this, in effect, closes the payroll period. So it will add the current pay values to the year-to-dates, and it will create a historical entry for that pay date. Once you've updated, you can then post the nominal link to accounts if you set that up, and that will post salary journal transactions into Sage 50 accounts. And then if you've had any leavers, you would then run the leaver wizard, which would record the leave date and enable you to print the P45. So in the next part of the demo, I'm going to update the records. We're then going to deal with our leaver, and then the final step there will be to submit our payroll to HMRC. So let's just rejoin the demo. Update records is the next task in my list, and it's also here on the process map. So we've still got everyone highlighted. I would click onto update records. You'll be reminded to do your pre-update reports first. So I've already done them. I'm going to click yes to continue. And then in the update records wizard, there is an option for you to take a manual backup of your data, which is a step I would strongly recommend you complete so that you have your own backup that you could restore back to if you need to. So once you've clicked through the backup wizard, the next step of the update records wizard shows you the pay frequency and number of employees. You click next again, and it will show the employee names, and they'll all be selected by default. And then if you click finish, that will then update the records. It'll confirm how many employees have been updated, and it will remind you to run the leaver wizard next if you've had any leavers before you do your full payment submission. Now, if you look at my employee list, the last updated date is now displaying the May pay date. And if I open the employee record and go to the history tab, we now have history for month 2. So I won't be able to change any of those values unless I was to restore a backup or use the rollback wizard. Now, before I can submit this information to HMRC, I do have a lever I need to deal with. Now, you can see in the process map, processing leavers comes before the full payment submission. So what I'm going to do is clear my selection and highlight the employee who has left. I could either click the process leavers option from the process map, or if I return to my employee tasks, I can find the lever wizard here on the left-hand side. So the lever wizard is just a case of recording the leaving date, which in my case was the 24th of May. You can then print P11 cards if you want them for your own records, so for PAYE and National Insurance. And then you would select the P45 plain paper layout, and you can either print it directly or you can preview it first. And this will show you the P45 that you can then give to your employee. So there are three parts. There's the employee's copy, part 1A. There's part 2 they give to the new employer, and then part 3 that the new employer completes. So there's no stationery required. It prints everything that you see on screen here. So we would print out a copy for our employee. Maybe we'd export a copy for our own records. And once we've got the P45, you click Finish. I'm just getting the reminder that the employee had an attachment. So I need to make sure I notify the court or creditor. And then you can see the current status is now set to lever. So this means that they can't be processed again. And if I want to hide them from the list, I can go to the criteria settings and just put a tick in the box to exclude current year leavers. So some people prefer to do that, to have a tidy employee list, but it's completely personal preference. So now that we've run the lever wizard, if I just return to my payroll tasks and to switch that process map back on, remember it was view, change view, and then process map. We can see our next step is to do the full payment submission. So if I select my employees again, I'll go into full payment submission. I'm just going to run it from the tasks here on the left-hand side. And this is where we're going to submit the information to HMRC. Now, you're not going to see this warning. This is just because I'm in a training room. So I'm going to continue past that. But when you do your full payment submission, you'll see this screen first, explaining what you're about to do. When you click Continue, it'll show your saved e-submission settings. So it's your user ID and password, as well as the company details. And then on the next screen, you get a summary of the information you're about to submit. So it includes starter and leaver information. So we've got a leaver there in the list. I also have a new starter, as well as the total liability. So that's the total tax, national insurance, and any student loan and postgraduate loan deductions. So if you're happy with that summary, you would click on to submit. You would then see a progress bar that moves across the screen as the data is being submitted. And when it's complete, you'll see this confirmation screen. So submission of your data has been successful. You would click on to close. And you can see again in the employee list, the last FPS date has now updated with my May pay date. So with both of these columns showing the May pay date, I know that my payroll is now complete. And if I ever need to view the information that was included in that submission, you can do just that by going to the e-submissions tasks. And there is an FPS viewer. So if I click FPS viewer, it shows all of the files that are created when I send an FPS. The most recent will be at the bottom. It just means that I can view what was in my FPS if I need to, send it to Excel, print it out, or export as an XML. So quite a handy feature if you need to know exactly what was in your submission. So that is our payroll pretty much done, but let's just recap those final few steps. So once we checked our payslips and reports, we ran update records. So remember to take your own backup at that point. System will also take an automatic backup. Then if required, post a nominal link. Run the lever wizard. So when it comes to levers, it's really important you do things in the right order. So update records first, then run the lever wizard before you do your full payment submission. And that was our final task, submit to HMRC. It includes any starter and leaver information, employee details, taxable payments, and then your liability, which is made up of tax, NI, and student loan contributions. And you must send this on or before your employee's pay date to avoid any late filing penalties. So with that complete, the last thing I'm going to talk about is your month-end tasks. So I have got a short month-end checklist, just the 3 items on this one. So when you get to the end of each tax month, you should run your P32 report, which will calculate the payment that you need to make to HMRC. If required, you would submit an employer payment summary, or EPS. Now this reports any adjustments to your liability arising from statutory payments you've recovered, CIS deductions suffered, or apprenticeship levy payments. And then the third step is to make your payment to HMRC on or before the payment deadline. Now, when I talk about month end, it is important to understand that we are dealing in tax months rather than calendar months. So the tax year begins on the 6th of April, which means each tax month starts on the 6th day of the month and ends on the 5th day of the following month. If you pay monthly, it's not really a problem. You generally have one pay date per month. Once you've completed that pay run, you can then move on to your month-end tasks. But if you pay weekly, fortnightly, or 4-weekly, it's really important that you've updated records for all pay dates that fall within the tax month. So any pay date up to the 5th day of the following month before you run these tasks. So if you want to plan ahead, check our tax calendars. There is a link to download them there on the handout. So when you're ready to run month end, first thing you would do is produce a P32 report. So this gives you the totals for the tax, national insurance, student loans, and any statutory payments that you've reclaimed. So the tax and NI has been submitted to HMRC as part of your FPS. So that's what made up the liability figure in the full payment submission we just saw. But then any reductions or adjustments to your liability would need to be sent as part of an EPS. Now, employment allowance, if you're claiming that, is dealt with at the start of the tax year. So if you do an employment allowance claim, you'll send an EPS at the start of the tax year, and that applies for the full year. But when it comes to statutory payments or apprenticeship levy, you need to check each month if you've done a reclaim or if you're paying an apprenticeship levy. And if you are, you do need to do an EPS month-end submission. So with all of that taken into account, you'll have the amount that is payable to HMRC. So let's complete the demo by running our month-end tasks. So first of all, I'll double check that I've completed my pay run for month 2. So all of my employees are monthly, and I can check the last updated and last FPS date, show my May pay date. And then when I'm ready to run the P32 report, I prefer to run it from my payroll links. So here in the payroll section, you'll have links. There's a direct link to the P32 report. You can also find this report within the reports folder in period end. So one to add to your favorites if you like to run it through reports, form P32 employer payment record. But if you use the link, it'll just preview it on screen for you. So the tax month in this case is month 2. I would then click OK. I'll just zoom in slightly for you, and you can see in this month, this is the amount of tax I've deducted. Haven't had any student or postgraduate loans, but I have had national insurance contributions. I'm claiming employment allowance, so I haven't claimed all of that yet. So some of that's being deducted this month. And I've also had a statutory payment that I've reclaimed. So when it comes to the amount I need to pay, it's this amount here at the bottom of my P32, which is obviously less than the liability that was submitted in my FPS. And because some of the deductions have come from statutory payment I've recovered, I will need to send an EPS to HMRC to report those additional values. So you can print this form or export it for your own records. I'm just going to close it out. And when you run a P32, just as a side note, if you check your company settings and click the HMRC payments tab, you'll see it keeps a note of the amount due, as well as tracking things like employment allowance. So it's always kept a record there of what your P32 said. And because I've done a reclaim this month, I can either go to my e-submission tasks in order to submit my employer payment summary from this link just here. Or if I'm still on my payroll tasks, I've got a link to employer payment summary just here as well. So this submission you need to do at the end of the tax month and no later than the 19th of the following month. You would choose the option that you're adjusting your payment because you've recovered statutory pay, would be the reason in my case. It displays the tax month. It displays the values that you've reclaimed for the tax year to date. You can then enter CIS deductions suffered if that applies to you. You've then got apprenticeship levy, if you're liable to pay that. And once you complete this wizard, it'll take you into the submission screen, which looks something like this. You check your details, and then you would submit your EPS to HMRC. So they then have the full picture. They've got your liability from the FPS. They've got the adjustments from the EPS. They already know about the employment allowance if you're claiming it, because you'll have sent an EPS at the start of the year. So they now expect the correct amount to be paid. So that's month end complete in payroll. The only other task was for you to make the payment to HMRC. So you do have until the 22nd of the following month if you pay electronically, or the 19th of the following month if you pay by cheque. So just to recap those final steps, P32 report you can run from the payroll links or from reports. That tells you how much you need to pay. And then the EPS is only required if you're recovering a statutory payment this month, you've suffered CIS deductions you're claiming this month, you're reporting apprenticeship levy payments, or if you didn't pay anyone and you haven't sent any FPSs, you send an EPS at the end of the month to inform HMRC that no payment is due. And the deadline for that submission, 19th of the following month. And that pretty much brings us to the end of the content for this webinar. And I can see we have a few minutes left just to deal with your questions. So the guys will be continuing to answering those in the background. But I'd like to run you through some of the further support that is available to you all, starting with some upcoming webinars. So we do have a couple more webinars this month. So you've just been at Get Your Payroll Done today. Next week, we're running variance reporting on Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. It's a new topic, just a short one that. And then on Thursday, the 30th of May, we have sick pay made simple. So to register for those sessions and to see what else is coming up, and also to access our recordings, head to our website, sage.co.uk/webinars, or follow the link on your handout. You can get other support on our online help centre at sage.co.uk/help, or by clicking any of the help icons that you find in Sage 50 Payroll. So from there, you can search for keywords, you can read support guides, you can watch our videos, and if you do need to get in touch with our support team, you will find all their contact details in the relevant help area. And another fantastic resource for you is Sage University. So this is completely free to sign up to. sageu.com is where you need to go. And once you've created your profile, you'll be able to look at the Sage 50 Payroll learning path. And from there, you'll find e-learning courses, online certification, and a range of bite-sized learning options to help you brush up on your Sage payroll knowledge. So do check that out if you haven't already done so. So in the few minutes that we have left of the webinar, we will continue to answer your final questions. So thank you in advance for your patience on that. And if you want to keep any of the questions and answers that you're seeing, do remember to copy and paste them into another document so that you can take them away. You will not be able to download them at the end. You can still download our handouts though. They're available from that piece of paper icon on the right-hand side of the screen. So grab your copies of the handouts if you want them. For those of you leaving right now, thanks so much for joining us at the webinar today. You will be invited to complete our webinar survey at the point you exit the session. And I'd really appreciate any of your comments on what you've seen today. We read every single one of them, and it helps us to keep these relevant to you and to continuously improve them moving forward. I'm going to be sending you a follow-up email later today as well, which contains links to the recording of this webinar and also to some of our upcoming sessions. It'd be great to see you on some of our webinars in the future. So as I say, we will keep the webinar open just to continue answering questions in the Q&A. But I'm going to say goodbye at this end. So thanks once again for joining us at the webinar. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it useful. And I do look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars in the future. But from myself, it's goodbye for now, and I'll see you on the next one.